He had never seen himself as a hero. Just another man surviving on the edge of a crumbling earth, working odd jobs, eating what he could afford, and keeping his head down when the world outside turned violent. Life was about endurance, not glory. But sometimes the universe doesn't ask whether you're ready to become someone's savior. It just drops the choice in your path and waits to see if you'll act. The night had been ordinary, the kind of night when he walked home from a late shift through the broken streets. The city was a patchwork of abandoned buildings, neon lights, and shadows where trouble always lingered. He had trained himself to avoid looking too long at those shadows, to walk quickly and keep moving. That night, however, the shadows didn't let him pass. They cried out. Two small voices, thin and desperate. He almost ignored them. People went missing every day, and it was safer not to intervene. But something in the sound stopped him. Fear mixed with hopelessness, like children who already knew no one was coming. Against every instinct, he followed the noise. In an alley, under the flicker of a broken streetlight, he saw them. Two girls, no older than 12, huddled against a wall. They were cornered by three older men, the kind that prowled these districts looking for easy prey.
He didn't think.
His body moved before his brain caught up. He shouted, threw a piece of metal, and charged forward with nothing but stubborn courage. The men fought back, fists swinging, but desperation made him reckless. He managed to drive them off, bloodied and breathless, but alive. The girls clung to him, as if he had pulled them back from death itself. They were fragile, thin, and dirty, with clothes torn and faces smudged. Yet there was something about them that struck him as strange. Their eyes, too bright, almost glowing in the dark. The way they whispered to each other in a language he didn't recognize, fluid and melodic, unlike anything he'd heard on Earth. He shook it off. Kids everywhere invented secret tongues to hide their pain. That's what he told himself. He couldn't leave them there. He took them to his small apartment, a place barely fit for one person, let alone three. He gave them food, cheap bread and broth, and watched them devour it as if they hadn't eaten in days. They didn't speak much, but when they did, their voices carried a strange weight, like children forced to grow older than their years. Over the days that followed, he noticed more oddities. At night, when they thought he was asleep, he heard them murmuring words filled with rhythm and tone, and sometimes the air seemed to hum faintly around them. Once, in the half-light of dawn, he saw the faint shimmer of a symbol on the back of one girl's neck, like a tattoo that glowed softly before fading. He said nothing. It wasn't his place to question. All he knew was that they were scared, and that no one else would care for them. He kept them safe as best he could. He taught them how to blend in, how to stay unnoticed in streets where weakness invited predators. They began to smile again, shy and hesitant, and their laughter filled the hollow corners of his apartment. For the first time in years, he felt like his life had a purpose greater than mere survival. Protecting them gave him something worth enduring for. But safety never lasts long in places like this. One evening, officials arrived at his door. Not police, something else. Their uniforms bore insignias he didn't recognize, and their eyes scanned every detail of his home with cold precision. They asked for the girls by name, names he had never heard them use before. He tried to shield them, but the girls stepped forward willingly, as if they knew this moment had always been coming. They embraced him tightly, whispering thanks in broken English. And then, in voices filled with an odd certainty, they promised him something he couldn't understand at the time. One day, we come back for you. The officials took them away into the night, and he never saw them again. Life moved on. He healed from the bruises of that alley fight, returned to his routine, and buried the memory beneath the grind of survival. But some nights, when the streets were quiet and the stars faintly visible through the smog, he remembered the glow in their eyes, the strange language that filled the air, and the way their words had carried a weight far beyond their years. He told himself they were just orphans, children lost in a broken city. That's all. Nothing more. But somewhere deep down, a voice whispered that there had been more to them than he could ever know. And though he tried to silence it, He could never forget the promise they made before they disappeared into the dark. Got it. You want Act 2, 950, 1,000 words. No repetition of Act 1, no headings, no filler. Straight storytelling in faceless narration style. This will cover the years of silence and survival part. Here's the script draft for Act 2, 975 words. 12 years passed, and the world did not become kinder. Earth had changed in ways that made survival harder for the weak and more complicated for the strong. The first contact with alien civilizations had not brought prosperity or miracles of technology, as the dreamers once promised. Instead, it had revealed just how insignificant humanity was in the vastness of the galaxy. Humans were tolerated, but not respected. Allowed to exist, but rarely acknowledged. The man grew older during these years. His hair thinned, his shoulders bent, and his hands grew calloused from endless labor. He never rose above poverty, never found wealth, and never stopped working simply to keep a roof over his head. He wasn't remarkable in skill or influence. But what set him apart was something the galaxy did not measure: the simple, stubborn refusal to lose his humanity. He had neighbors who had given up on kindness, who looked after themselves and no one else. Yet he never hardened that way. He carried groceries for the elderly woman across the hall. He repaired broken locks for families who couldn't pay. He shared his food, even when he had little. When violence spilled into the streets, he stepped in, not because he was strong, but because he couldn't bear to watch cruelty go unanswered. People whispered that he was a fool for caring, but even fools could inspire respect. The memory of the two girls lingered in the back of his mind, though the years blurred their faces. He sometimes wondered what had become of them. Had they found safety? Had they grown up far from the chaos that devoured so many lives? He doubted they even remembered him, a nameless man from a forgotten city. But sometimes, when he was alone, he thought about the words they left him with, that strange promise spoken with certainty. One day, we come back for you. He had convinced himself it was the imagination of frightened children, words meant to comfort themselves as they were led away. Still, the promise lingered like an ember, buried under ash, but never fully extinguished. The world around him reminded him daily that humans were small players in a galaxy dominated by others. Trade was controlled by alien corporations. Governments bent to the will of outsiders whose ships hovered in orbit and whose technology dwarfed anything humanity could build. Most humans had never left Earth, and most would never be allowed to. They were treated as laborers, cheap recruits, or background noise in the vast machinery of interstellar politics. The man accepted this quietly. He wasn't one to chase rebellion or dream of heroics. He only wanted to endure, to live out his days without losing the part of himself that still believed in decency. Rumors trickled down through the channels of the city. Stories of dynasties rising and falling among the stars, of wars fought far beyond Earth's reach, of royal families hunted and dethroned. But for most, these were distant echoes. Earth had no say in such affairs. And for him, it was only background noise, another reminder that the galaxy was too large for a man like him to matter. He focused instead on what was within reach, helping those around him, surviving one day at a time. Yet every so often, he would catch a glimpse of the night sky. The stars shimmered faintly beyond the polluted clouds, countless worlds hidden behind pinpricks of light. When he stared long enough, the questions returned. Who were those girls, really? Why had officials come for them instead of leaving them to the streets? Why had their eyes glowed with a light no human child should carry? And what had that symbol been, etched briefly into the skin before fading from sight? He had no answers, only fragments of memory. And as the years wore on, he convinced himself that the answers no longer mattered. Age made him slower. He could no longer fight as he once had, no longer stand tall against the gangs that roamed the alleys. But even when bruised and beaten, he did not turn away from helping others. Those who knew him came to respect him in quiet ways. They might not have said it aloud, but they trusted him. He was steady, a rare constant in a world always on the verge of collapse. The galaxy, however, had no interest in constants. It surged and shifted with wars, revolutions, and exiles. Fleets rose and fell. Empires fractured and rebuilt. To the man, it was only distant thunder. He believed he would live and die without ever touching that storm, a single grain of sand on a vast shore. He never realized that far away, across stars and empires, his name was not forgotten. The kindness he had given so freely, the risks he had taken for 2 lost children, had echoed into places he could not imagine. He thought himself invisible. But the galaxy had already begun to turn its eyes toward him, pulled not by wealth or power, but by a debt of honor that no throne could ignore. Word count 976. The night was silent when the sky split open. At first, it was mistaken for a meteor, a streak of light cutting across the heavens. But the streak slowed, widened, and became something that blotted out the stars. A shape vast enough to cast shadows across entire districts descended through the clouds, its hull gleaming with symbols no one on Earth recognized. Governments panicked. Civilian broadcasts were interrupted by emergency alerts. Alien administrators already stationed on Earth scrambled for answers. To most, it looked like the beginning of an invasion. The man stood among the crowd in his neighborhood, neck craned upward as the massive ship lowered with impossible grace. He heard the fear in the voices around him, felt the trembling of the ground as the ship's engines whispered power beyond comprehension. No one knew what it wanted. Every defense system Earth had was already locked in standby, useless against something so far beyond them. Then the ship spoke. Not in the languages of Earth, nor in the clipped dialects of alien overseers, but in a voice that resonated across frequencies, translated instantly into every tongue. It called for one name, his. Confusion spread like wildfire. Officials demanded answers. Soldiers surrounded him before he could even react, weapons raised, unsure whether he was a target or a messenger. Neighbors stared in disbelief. Some whispered that he must have betrayed humanity, others that he had been chosen as an example. He himself felt only shock. Of all the names in the world, why his? Within minutes, convoys arrived to seize him. Military officers barked questions he couldn't answer. Who was he? What connection did he have to the vessel? Why had it ignored entire governments to speak only his name? He could only shake his head. He had no answers to give. Fear pressed on him like a weight. The eyes of the world had turned to him, and he had no idea why. The starship began to descend further, lowering until it hovered above the capital. Its presence silenced entire cities. From its underside, a smaller craft detached and glided downward. It landed with elegance, and from its doors stepped figures draped in garments that shimmered like woven light. The world's cameras focused, streaming every detail to billions. At their center walked 2 women, tall, graceful, and radiant with authority. Their eyes glowed with the same light he remembered, though now sharper, commanding. Their faces had matured, but he knew them instantly. The 2 girls from the alley, the children he had once saved, now carried themselves with the weight of royalty. The soldiers surrounding him froze as the women approached. The crowd fell into silence. Then, in a moment that no one had expected, the 2 women bowed deeply before him. Not a polite nod, not a gesture of formality, an open declaration of reverence. Gasps rippled through the watching masses. They addressed him not as a stranger, but as their savior. They spoke of the night he had risked his life for them, of the shelter he gave when they had nothing, of the kindness that kept them alive when power and wealth had been stripped away. They revealed their true names, names that carried weight across the galaxy, heirs to a dynasty believed lost after a coup had shattered their throne. The officials who had taken them away years ago had not been rescuers but loyal protectors, ensuring their survival until the time was right to reclaim their place. The revelation struck Earth like a thunderclap. Humanity, dismissed for so long as a minor species, now saw one of their own lifted above kings and presidents by the heirs of a galactic empire. The man stood in shock, unable to grasp the scale of what he was hearing. He had acted out of instinct, not foresight. To him, saving 2 children had been an act of decency, nothing more. But to them, it had been salvation. The women declared before all who watched that their empire owed its survival to him. By the laws of their people, the one who saves royal blood does not become a servant or a subject. They become bound to the crown itself, honored as equal to those they saved. His name was etched into their dynasty's history, proclaimed across the stars as the savior of their line. Officials stammered, unsure whether to protest or submit. Earth's governments, so long used to being overlooked, now found themselves bypassed entirely. The Starship had not come for them. It had come for him, and the galaxy was watching. He wanted to deny it, to insist that he was no hero. He had no titles, no training, no claim to such recognition. Yet the sincerity in their eyes silenced his protests. They had not forgotten. 12 years had passed, but to them, the debt remained unbroken. When the royal envoy extended their hands, inviting him to board the vessel, he hesitated only a moment. The life he had known was gone already, erased the moment his name echoed across the planet. With a mixture of fear and awe, he stepped forward. The women flanked him, and the world bowed its head as he was led toward the waiting starship. For the first time in his life, he realized he was no longer invisible. The galaxy knew his name, and it had been spoken not as a threat, but as an honor. The man who once believed himself powerless had become the measure of humanity's worth. The starship's interior was unlike anything he had ever seen. Vast corridors shimmered with light that seemed alive, walls carved with symbols that pulsed faintly as if they carried the heartbeat of the vessel itself. Every step he took was watched by figures in ornate attire, nobles and commanders who bowed as he passed. The respect wasn't directed at the royalty beside him. It was directed at him. He struggled to understand. To him, he was still the same man who had patched broken locks, carried groceries, and worked thankless jobs to survive. Yet here, aboard a vessel that represented power far beyond Earth, he was treated as if his presence was sacred. The women, no longer the frightened children he once knew, guided him with a mix of warmth and reverence. They told him of the years since they were taken, of the war that had consumed their dynasty, of the struggle to reclaim what was theirs. Through it all, they had remembered the one human who saved them when no one else dared. He wanted to tell them he didn't deserve this. He wanted to insist that what he had done had been nothing more than a reflex, an ordinary act of kindness. But the Empire did not see it that way. In their culture, saving the life of a royal heir was not simply an accident of circumstance, it was destiny, a binding act that wove the savior into the lineage of the throne itself. His name was already written into their records, to be spoken for generations. Earth's leaders sent frantic transmissions, demanding explanations, trying to insert themselves into negotiations. But their words carried no weight here. The Starship had bypassed governments and councils. It had chosen a single man. For the first time, humanity's voice in the galaxy was not spoken by presidents or generals, but by someone who had lived among the forgotten. He sat in chambers that glittered with alien light, listening as nobles and commanders bowed their heads and swore loyalty in his presence. He felt out of place, a laborer standing in a palace, yet the queens never let him doubt his importance. They reminded him that he had been the first to see them not as heirs or symbols, but as children in need. That truth carried more weight than any crown. In time, he realized what this meant for his species. Humanity had been seen as weak, insignificant, useful only as workers or soldiers for hire. Now, through him, the Empire itself extended honor to all humans. If one human could embody such compassion that it saved a dynasty, then perhaps humanity was not to be dismissed. He had become a bridge between worlds, not by power or conquest, but by decency. Still, he did not let it change who he was. He walked the halls of the ship humbly, speaking with servants, listening to soldiers, showing the same patience he had shown to neighbors back home. Where others might have seized the opportunity for wealth or dominance, he remained grounded. And that, more than anything, deepened the respect he was given. When the Starship finally lifted from Earth, billions watched. The man stood beside the queens as the planet grew smaller beneath them. To many, it was a moment of awe and confusion. For him, it was surreal. He had once believed he would live and die unnoticed in a crumbling city, a footnote in no one's story. Yet now he was being carried into the stars, his name spoken with reverence by an empire. The queens told him of their plans, to rebuild their throne, to strengthen their people, to honor the debts that bound them. And always, they spoke of him not as an outsider, but as family. His place was secured not through treaties or titles, but through an unbreakable bond forged in an alley 12 years earlier. As days passed aboard the vessel, he began to see the truth of HFY. Humanity had always been measured by its lack of power, its lack of reach. But what he represented was something no empire could replicate. Strength fades, wealth corrodes, and thrones are always contested. Compassion, however, endures. It was not weapons that had saved a dynasty. It was not technology. It was a single man's choice to step forward when others turned away. When the ship reached the stars, he stood on its deck and looked out at the endless expanse. For the first time, he felt the weight of what he carried. He was no longer only himself. He was the reminder of what humanity could be. Not the strongest, not the richest, but the kind that reached out even when there was nothing to gain. And as the vessel sailed deeper into the galaxy, he understood the promise the girls had made long ago. They had come back, not simply for him, but for the truth he represented. He was not their servant, not their subject. He was their savior, their family, their equal. His name would be carried across the stars, remembered long after empires rose and fell. He had never sought power. He had never asked for reward. Yet when the royal starship came for him, the galaxy itself learned what it meant to be human.